Earth trembled with excitement as the Zorati warrior women descended in their massive, luminescent spacecraft. The world had never seen anything like it, a vessel pulsating with iridescent light, adorned with symbols that radiated power and supremacy. The Zorati emerged, towering figures draped in sleek, armored suits that shimmered like liquid metal. Their weapons, embedded in their very skin like ornamental jewelry, glowed ominously. They radiated confidence, their every step echoing with the clink of their integrated armaments. Earth's leaders stood in formation, attempting to hide their apprehension. Diplomats, scientists, and military officials alike marveled at the Zorati, both intimidated and fascinated. The Zorati leader, towering over the human delegation, scanned the crowd with a smirk. Her voice boomed through the translator, dripping with condescension. "We expected more," she announced, her words reverberating with disdain. "Where are your weapons? Or are you such a primitive species that you lack even the basic concept of visible armaments?" Her warriors laughed, a synchronized chorus of superiority. The Earth delegation exchanged uneasy glances. General Parks, a burly man with decades of military experience, tightened his grip on his cap. Diplomats whispered among themselves, wondering how to salvage the situation. It was then that Greg, an underprepared yet overly confident cultural liaison, decided to intervene. Greg was not known for tact. In fact, his contributions were often seen as more of a liability than an asset. But today, his misplaced humor would change everything. He stepped forward, his suit slightly wrinkled and his tie askew. Clearing his throat, he grinned nervously at the Zorati leader. "Well, you know," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "we humans do carry our most powerful weapon between our legs." Silence. A silence so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the room. The Zorati warriors froze, their glowing eyes narrowing as they processed his words. Greg, realizing he might have overstepped, chuckled nervously. "Just a little joke," he added, though no one joined in. The Zorati leader raised an eyebrow, or at least what resembled an eyebrow. "Between your legs?" she repeated, her voice a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Yes," Greg replied, doubling down out of sheer panic. "It's a biological weapon. You know, an advantage unique to humanity." The Zorati murmured among themselves, their expressions ranging from disbelief to intrigue. Their leader silenced them with a raised hand. "Biological weaponry, you say? Intriguing. Primitive yet effective." Greg's joke had been taken literally. The realization spread across the human delegation like wildfire. Some gawked in horror, while others struggled to stifle their laughter. General Parks muttered under his breath, "What the hell have you done, Greg?" The Zorati leader stepped closer, her imposing figure casting a shadow over Greg. "You claim superiority in a field we have yet to explore. Bold for a species so primitive. Perhaps you are not as helpless as you appear." The warriors around her nodded, their expressions now laced with respect, or was it suspicion? Greg blinked, caught between terror and absurd pride. Yeah, sure. That's us. Full of surprises." The leader's gaze intensified. "Very well. We shall investigate this claim thoroughly. If it is true, Earth may prove to be a more formidable force than we anticipated." Before anyone could interject, the Zorati leader turned on her heel, her warriors following her back to their ship. The humans stood in stunned silence as the aliens ascended the ramp, their departure marked by the whir of advanced machinery. Greg exhaled sharply. "I think that went well." General Parks grabbed him by the collar. "You've just started an intergalactic misunderstanding over a bad joke. If this escalates, it's on you, Greg." But for now, Earth had bought itself time wrapped in one man's offhand remark. Whether it was a disaster in the making or a stroke of unintentional genius, only the Zorati's investigation would tell. The Zorati spacecraft loomed in orbit, its shimmering panels reflecting the pale blue of Earth below. Inside, the warrior women gathered in a cavernous chamber filled with holographic projections and alien instruments. Their leader, Zaravel, stood at the center, her piercing gaze fixed on the hologram of a human male anatomy, projected with unnerving accuracy. "This," she declared, gesturing to the floating image, "is the supposed weapon these Earthlings boast of. Primitive, yet perhaps revolutionary in its simplicity. If their claim holds merit, it could redefine how we approach warfare." Her words hung in the air as the warriors exchanged skeptical looks. One of them, a tall figure with glowing circuitry etched into her armor, spoke up. "It's absurd, Commander. How could such a fragile organ possess any real power? It lacks durability, range, and precision. Surely, this is a ploy to distract us." Zaravel's expression remained stern. "Perhaps. But consider their audacity. They openly flaunted this so-called weapon in our presence. If nothing else, it warrants investigation." With a wave of her hand, the hologram shifted, displaying a series of scans taken from the humans during their arrival. The Zorati's advanced tech had already mapped their physiological structure. The warriors leaned in, analyzing the images with a mix of fascination and disdain. "They seem to rely heavily on biological functions for survival," one warrior noted, her tone dripping with superiority. "Weak lungs, fragile bones, and an over-reliance on their circulatory systems. How such a species managed to leave their atmosphere is a mystery. Yet they do possess resilience," Zaravel countered. "Their capacity to adapt is evident in their survival against environmental challenges. Perhaps their weapon functions in ways we cannot yet comprehend. Our task is to uncover its purpose." The warriors murmured in reluctant agreement. Zaravel activated another projection, this one showing a simulation of the human weapon in question. The room fell silent as the hologram displayed an exaggerated depiction of its potential capabilities, based entirely on misinterpreted human statements and cultural records. The simulation depicted humans utilizing their weapon in absurdly dramatic ways, launching themselves like projectiles, immobilizing enemies with a single movement, and even causing structural damage to enemy fortresses. The warriors burst into laughter, their voices echoing through the chamber. "This must be satire," one exclaimed, clutching her sides. "No weapon could operate in such a ludicrous manner. Or perhaps their intelligence is as flawed as their anatomy," another added, drawing more laughter. Zaravel raised a hand, silencing them. "Mock them if you will, but remember, every advancement begins with what others deem impossible. Dismiss this at your own risk." The room grew quiet, though smirks lingered on the warriors' faces. Zaravel continued. "We will deploy reconnaissance teams to study their biology further. Extract samples, observe their behavior, and determine if their claims hold substance. If they have indeed weaponized their anatomy, we must know how, and to what extent." The warriors nodded, their skepticism giving way to determination. They would approach this challenge as they had all others, with precision and superiority. Hours later, Zorati operatives descended to Earth under the cover of night. Their mission, to observe and collect data without revealing their presence. What they found, however, was far from what they expected. The operatives infiltrated gyms, locker rooms, and medical facilities, guided by their leaders' orders. Their stealth technology allowed them to remain undetected as they witnessed humans engaging in routine activities. To their astonishment, the weapon seemed to play no role in combat or defense. Instead, it appeared to serve entirely different, perplexing functions. In one instance, an operative observed a human couple in a park, engaging in what appeared to be a ritualistic bonding activity. The male's weapon, far from being used offensively, seemed integral to the process. The Zorati recorded the interaction meticulously, though their confusion only deepened. "These Earthlings are either geniuses or fools," one operative remarked, her voice transmitted back to the ship. "Their weapon lacks any discernible offensive capability, yet they treat it with reverence. Perhaps it serves a psychological purpose rather than a physical one." Back on the ship, Zaravel reviewed the findings with a mix of frustration and intrigue. The data was inconclusive, and the warriors were divided. Some argued that the humans had deceived them, while others believed the weapon's potential had yet to be unlocked. Zaravel turned to her second-in-command, her voice steady. "Prepare for direct interaction. If observation cannot yield answers, perhaps confrontation will. Let us see how these humans wield their so-called weapon in the face of a challenge. And so, the Zorati prepared for the next phase of their investigation, their curiosity tinged with both skepticism and a growing respect for the unpredictable nature of humanity. The day of confrontation arrived, and Earth's representatives nervously awaited the Zorati warriors' next move. There was an air of tension that had settled over the planet, with governments scrambling to prepare for whatever challenge lay ahead. The Zorati had made it clear, they weren't satisfied with observation alone. They intended to test humanity's biological weapon firsthand. The Zorati leader, Zaravel, issued her ultimatum through a broadcast that rattled every corner of Earth. We will meet on neutral ground. There you will demonstrate your claimed advantage. Show us how this biological weapon functions. Prove that you possess the strength you claim, or we will regard you as nothing more than an amusement. Humanity's collective breath hitched. The time for jokes had passed. The Zorati had made it clear that they weren't just interested in casual diplomacy. They wanted to witness humanity's so-called strength in action. But Greg, the cultural liaison who had ignited the whole misunderstanding with his offhand comment, was nowhere near prepared for what was about to unfold. He sat in the back of the war room, nervously running his fingers through his hair. General Parks paced in front of the long table, his face taut with anxiety. "This is your mess, Greg," the general muttered, his voice low. "And now we have to figure out how to get out of it." Greg wiped the sweat from his brow. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. "It was supposed to be a joke, okay? I never thought they'd take it this seriously." "Well, they did," Parks snapped. "And now they're coming to watch. What's your plan, Greg?" Greg stood, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. "I don't know. I mean, I'm not exactly a biological weapon expert. Maybe we could just stall them?" "Stall them?" Parks growled. "They've already decided you're hiding the greatest military secret in the galaxy. We can't stall them, Greg. You've made us the laughingstock of the universe. Now we have to deliver." The human delegation scrambled to come up with a solution. Scientists rushed to analyze the alien data that had been collected, hoping to find any sort of advantage they could use. Doctors and military strategists huddled together, trying to devise a plan of action to somehow appease the Zorati without triggering a full-scale intergalactic war. As the day drew closer, Greg found himself appointed as the one to explain the biological weapon to the Zorati in person. His heart sank. The idea of facing the aliens, those towering, glowing figures with their incomprehensible tech, was enough to make any human quake in fear. But Greg, with no better option, reluctantly agreed. The moment they met on neutral ground, the Zorati warrior women were not just imposing in stature, their entire presence felt like a judgment. Zaravel stood at the forefront, arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on Greg as she waited for him to begin. The air was thick with silence. Greg, unable to muster any semblance of confidence, cleared his throat. "All right, so you want to see our biological weapon in action, huh?" Zaravel raised an eyebrow, her lips curling in a knowing smile. "We do. You claim to have a weapon hidden between your legs. We are here to observe its power and determine if it can truly rival our technological advancements." Greg paused for a moment, trying to think of something, anything, that could save him from this bizarre and escalating disaster. He gestured vaguely to his body. Well, okay, here it is." Zaravel took a step forward, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Proceed. Show us how your weapon can defend your species. We will observe." Greg froze, realizing the gravity of the situation. He hadn't anticipated that the Zorati would want him to perform some kind of demonstration. What exactly did they expect him to do? The only thing he could think of was the old Earth expression. "Walk it like you talk it." But could he even do that? "You know, sometimes humans don't really show their weapon unless there's an actual need," Greg said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Like it's more of a situational kind of thing?" Zaravel's eyes narrowed. "Situational? Is it not powerful enough to warrant demonstration?" Greg stumbled over his words. No, I mean, look. It's not the weapon you think it is. It's more like a tool for negotiation, you know? The Zorati leader and her warriors exchanged puzzled glances. Greg could see that their patience was wearing thin. A tool for negotiation? Zaravel repeated, her voice cool and sharp. How does a tool serve in your battles? Explain. Greg knew he was digging himself into a deeper hole, but he tried one more time. Okay, look. It's not about using it in battle, alright? It's more about, confidence. It helps humans, connect on a deeper level. Zaravel stepped closer, studying Greg with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Confidence? You claim this biological weapon is a tool of connection? Yeah? Greg said, nodding enthusiastically. Like bonding. It's essential for building alliances and, emotional connections. That's where we're, superior to you. Zaravel blinked, her expression flickering between confusion and skepticism. You are suggesting that your species' strength lies in emotional manipulation? That this is your secret weapon? Well, Greg started, but he was interrupted by one of the other Zorati warriors. This is absurd. We've been investigating for days, and this weapon has no clear offensive or defensive value. Zaravel raised a hand to silence the room. She took a deep breath before turning back to Greg. We underestimated your species. This weapon of yours is not what we expected, but you have proven one thing: you are unpredictable. Perhaps there is more to humanity than we thought. Greg exhaled, relieved that the situation hadn't devolved into chaos. Still, the Zorati didn't seem satisfied, and there was no telling how far they'd take this investigation. But for now, he had bought Earth some time that he hoped would be enough for the planet to figure out a way to truly understand their alien visitors. As the days passed following the confrontation, the Zorati remained intrigued, albeit still skeptical about humanity's so-called biological weapon. The alien warrior women continued their investigation, scrutinizing every piece of Earth's anatomy with relentless precision. Meanwhile, the human delegation scrambled to avoid further misunderstandings, unsure of how to navigate the delicate situation without provoking the Zorati into escalating their demands. Greg, still reeling from his earlier interaction, found himself thrust into yet another bizarre encounter. He had been summoned to a follow-up meeting with Zaravel, who had decided to discuss what she called the human biological advantage in more detail. It was an uncomfortable thought. Humanity had made their position clear. They had no advanced weaponry like the Zorati, nor were they inclined to compete in that area. However, the aliens had now latched onto the idea of human, biological prowess, as if it were some sort of divine weapon waiting to be revealed. Greg arrived at the meeting space, which had been arranged in a neutral zone, one that felt eerily sterile, designed to minimize any potential for miscommunication. Zaravel was already there, standing tall and regal, her sharp eyes glinting as if she were preparing to dissect Greg with a single glance. You, she began without preamble, have misled us, human. This weapon, this biological advantage, we need to understand it better. Your species claims to be stronger than we thought, but you continue to dance around revealing its true power. Greg shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He had hoped that after their previous meeting, the Zorati might have given up on the idea. But now, it seemed like they were more obsessed with this bizarre interpretation of human anatomy than ever. I wasn't dancing around anything, okay? Greg stammered, trying to sound as confident as possible despite his growing anxiety. It's just that you guys are making it sound like it's some kind of weapon. It's not, well, not in the way you think. Zaravel raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Not in the way we think? Then explain. How does this biological advantage function in a combat setting? Greg scratched his head, racking his brain for a way to explain things without making the situation worse. Well, let me put it this way. It's not really about combat. It's more about, emotional resilience. Humans have we have this ability to form strong, deep connections. That's our, advantage. Zaravel's expression darkened. Emotional connection? You are suggesting your species is superior because you can bond with one another? Greg sighed, realizing this wasn't going well. Yes. Exactly. That's the weapon. We can bond, build alliances, and strengthen relationships. It's like emotional fortitude. Humans have a unique way of connecting that you don't quite understand yet. The Zorati leader seemed to be processing his words, though it was clear she was struggling to make sense of it all. She crossed her arms, her gaze never leaving Greg as she weighed the explanation. You think that an emotional connection is enough to rival the technology we possess? Your strength lies in feelings? Greg hesitated, unsure if his next words would make the situation worse. It's more than just feelings. It's about cooperation. Trust. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't what you can physically do, it's what you can build with others. And that's something humanity excels at. For a moment, Zaravel said nothing. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence as she seemed to digest Greg's words. Finally, she spoke. You claim that humanity's strength lies in your ability to connect emotionally, to bond. That is what you think will win the war? Greg winced at the word war, but he pressed on. Look, we've never needed to go to war to prove our strength. We've survived by working together, adapting, and forming bonds. That's been our advantage all along. Zaravel's voice turned cold as she responded. That is not what we expected. If you cannot demonstrate your weapon, we will be forced to reconsider our position on Earth's worth. Greg's mind raced as he realized that the Zorati weren't buying his explanation. They still believed that humanity's supposed weapon was something tangible, something they could see and quantify. His explanation about emotional strength and cooperation had fallen flat. It wasn't enough to appease their need for proof. Well, maybe we can show you how it works, Greg said, trying to salvage the situation. I mean, it's hard to show you something like trust. But there's a way we can demonstrate our, emotional resilience. Zaravel seemed intrigued, though still skeptical. You wish to demonstrate this resilience? How? Greg thought for a moment before the idea hit him. We could put it to the test. A challenge, something that requires cooperation. If you're willing to give us a chance, we can show you that humanity's greatest weapon is in our ability to adapt and work together. Zaravel tilted her head, considering his proposal. A challenge. What kind of challenge would that be? Simple, Greg said, trying to sound more confident now that he had a plan. We could have a contest of endurance. Something physical, but that requires teamwork. You'll see that it's not about individual power, it's about how we come together when it counts. The Zorati leader seemed to soften slightly. She hadn't expected humanity to propose a challenge, especially not one that would require cooperation instead of a traditional combat-style competition. You think that by working together, your species can demonstrate its worth? She asked, her voice still carrying a hint of skepticism. I do, Greg said firmly. I know it's not what you were expecting, but this is how we show our strength. Zaravel seemed to deliberate for a moment before finally nodding. Very well. We will give your challenge a chance. If you fail to demonstrate your resilience, you will have nothing to offer us. But if you succeed, Greg knew the stakes were high, but this was humanity's last chance to prove that they were more than just a primitive species. He couldn't afford to let them down. We'll succeed, Greg said, his voice resolute. We always do. With that, the challenge was set. Humanity's resilience would be tested. And for the first time in weeks, Greg felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the way to win the Zorati over.